You think you know Roman history? White togas, wise laws, majestic architecture? Forget it. Today we are going to rip off this beautiful marble mask. You will learn why one of the most famous monuments of antiquity is actually a detailed, cynical instruction manual on genocide, carved in stone. We will tell you how a man called the best emperor for centuries turned war into a cold-blooded business project to plug a giant hole in the budget. You are in for a story about how an entire state was completely wiped off the face of the earth for the sake of saving the economy. You will learn about a weapon that struck such animal terror into the invincible legions that Roman smiths had to frantically redesign armor right in the middle of a campaign. We will reveal the secret of an engineering operation for which the Romans turned a whole river back to retrieve treasures from the bottom that changed the global economy. Why did the elite of an entire nation choose a last feast with a cup of poison instead of wine? Whose severed head became the main trophy, thrown onto dirty steps for the crowd's amusement? And are you ready to find out on what bloody foundation the greatness we are used to admiring actually stands? Watch this until the end. The truth hidden behind the glossy facade of history will shock you much more than you can imagine. Stand right here, right at the base of this marble colossus piercing the Roman sky. Tourists around you crane their necks, squinting from the sun, trying to make out the reliefs reaching into the heights. For them, Trajan's column is a masterpiece of art, a postcard from eternity, a symbol of the greatness of an empire that brought the light of civilization into the darkness of barbarism. Tour guides monotonously mumble about victories, about glorious legions, about the wisdom of the best of princes. But you are not here for that. Turn off the audio guide. Forget the school textbooks. Listen. If you put your ear to the cold stone, you won't hear fanfares. You will hear the wheezing of the dying. This 30-meter pillar is not a monument to heroes. It is the most expensive and cynical manual on genocide in human history. It is a stone comic book detailing how to wipe an entire people off the face of the earth to close a budget deficit. A beautiful marble wrapper for a monstrous crime. And today, we will tear off this wrapper. We will read this relief not as a poem, but as case materials in a criminal investigation. An investigation into how Rome's economic prosperity was paid for by the complete physical annihilation of the Dacian civilization. Are you ready to find out what the foundation of the Colosseum is actually made of? It isn't mixed with cement. It is mixed with blood and stolen gold. Let's go back. Forget about the marble. Breathe in this air. The year 98 AD. Rome. Do you expect to see a golden city, the blinding shine of an empire at its zenith? You are mistaken. Rome is suffocating. The empire is like an old lion that can still roar but has lost its teeth. The economy is in ruins. The treasury is as empty as a sun-bleached skull in the desert. Inflation is devouring the silver denarius, turning money into trash right in the citizens' wallets. Rome smells of fear and sewage. The previous emperor, the paranoid Domitian, and the kind old man Nerva left an inheritance that makes you want to hang yourself. The state is bankrupt. The legions on the borders are grumbling. There is nothing to pay the soldiers with, and a hungry legionary with a sword in his hand is scarier than any barbarian. But the most humiliating thing is happening in the north. Look at the map. There, beyond the broad Danube, in the misty mountains of Transylvania, sits the enemy, Dacia. But Rome hates Dacia not because it threatens border security. That is a lie for the Senate. The truth is much more prosaic and dirty. Rome pays tribute to the barbarians. Imagine this humiliation. The masters of the world, The conquerors of Carthage and Greece send convoys with gold and engineers to King Decebalus every year, just so he will sit still. This is called subsidies, but every shopkeeper in the Forum knows the truth. It's a protection racket. The barbarian king holds Rome by the throat, and every year his grip gets tighter. For a Roman patriot, this is a disgrace. For a Roman treasurer, it is a catastrophe. The empire is living on credit, borrowing from a future that does not exist, and at this moment he steps onto the stage. Marcus Ulpius Trajan. History will remember him as a noble warrior, Optimus Princeps, father of the fatherland. But let's look the truth in the eye. Trajan was not a philosopher on the throne. He was a pragmatist to the bone. He looked at Dacia not as an enemy to be defeated in fair combat. He looked at it as an overripe fruit stuffed with gold. Dacia was not just a country. It was a walking ATM that Rome desperately needed to crack open, at any cost. In the Orostia Mountains, in the heart of the Dacian kingdom, lay deposits of gold and silver that made Roman brokers dizzy. 165 tons of gold, 331 tons of silver. These are not just numbers. This is a life preserver for the sinking Titanic of the Roman economy. This is an opportunity to buy the army's loyalty, feed the eternally hungry plebs, and build those very forums we admire today. Trajan understood one thing: diplomacy was over. The time for negotiations expired along with the last denarius in the treasury. He didn't need peace. He needed capital. And he made a decision that would forever change the map of Europe. This would not be a war for glory. This would be a hostile takeover on a national scale. A debt collection raid, blown up to the size of a world slaughter. Look closely at the faces of Romans on the streets in the year 98. They don't yet know that their savior has already signed the death warrant for an entire nation. They see hope in Trajan. Senators applaud the new emperor, awaiting the return of the good old days. But Trajan is not smiling. In his headquarters, there is no place for poetry. Cold calculation reigns there. The maps are laid out. Logisticians calculate how much grain is needed to feed 100,000 killers. Blacksmiths forge gladii day and night. This is not preparation for a nightly tournament. This is preparation for the industrial slaughter of livestock. And the Dacians are designated as the livestock. Trajan knew, to take the gold, it wasn't enough to simply defeat Decebalus's army. He had to break the nation's spine. He had to destroy their cities, burn their shrines, drive their children into slavery. Leave scorched earth where people had lived for centuries. Do you still believe in the good emperor? Ask yourself, are you ready to enjoy the grandeur of Roman architecture, knowing that every brick in it is paid for with the life of a Dacian child? Are you ready to call Trajan a hero, understanding that his triumph is the triumph of a butcher who simply did his job well? Trajan's column is silent, but facts scream. And the first fact of this story is simple and terrible. The war began not because the Dacians attacked. The war began because Rome needed money. And for this money, the empire was ready to turn into a machine of death. A machine that had already begun its movement north, clanking with iron and grinding road dust. While Rome celebrated the ascension of the new emperor, in the mountains of Dacia, the wind was already carrying the scent of coming blood. But no one, not even Decebalus himself, the cunning and cruel leader of the barbarians, could imagine what kind of nightmare was approaching his land. Trajan was not going to play by the rules. He wasn't just going to win. He was going to erase, annul, cancel Dacia. And while the legions marched toward the Danube, stamping a step that resonated as a tremor in the earth, the headquarters tents were already discussing not battle strategy, but the logistics of removing trophies. The skin of the bear that hadn't been killed yet was already divided, sold, and pawned. All that remained was to skin the carcass, but Dacia was not going to give up without a fight. Decebalus, this wolf of the Carpathians who had humiliated Rome for decades, was preparing a welcome. He knew that this time the Romans had not come to negotiate. He saw the glint in the imperial eagle's eyes, the glint of greed, which is scarier than any hatred. And while Trajan checked the readiness of his steel fists, in the forges of Sarmizegetusa, the sacred capital of the Dacians, they were sharpening curved swords, falxes, a weapon capable of cutting off an arm along with a shield in a single blow. A weapon that would soon make Roman legionaries squeal with terror. The stage is set. The actors have taken their places. The curtain rises, but behind it is not a theater. Behind it is a slaughterhouse. And the first act of this tragedy will be the transformation of Trajan himself. From a simple general, he must become a god of war. But before the first blood is spilled on the banks of the Danube, we must see how this mechanism of death worked from the inside. How a human turns into a function. How an emperor becomes the chief mechanic of war. Rome froze in anticipation of a holiday, but got an inspection. When Marcus Ulpius Trajan entered the Eternal City, the streets did not drown in wine, and the senators did not hear the usual flattering speeches. The emperor did not smile. He was 45 years old, and he was a soldier through and through. He had the walk of a man used to kneading mud with army caligae, not shuffling sandals on palace mosaics. He looked at Rome not as a prize, but as a broken mechanism that needed to be fixed urgently before putting it into action. And he started with the most dangerous part of this mechanism, with those who were used to killing emperors. Look at the Praetorian Guard, the elite, bodyguards, kingmakers. It was they who stabbed Domitian. It was they who humiliated old Nerva, forcing him to dance to their tune. They thought Trajan would become their new puppet. What a fatal mistake. Trajan summoned Prefect Casparius Aelianus and his henchmen. "I need to discuss security with you," he said. And he discussed it. Calmly, without shouting or theatrical gestures, he gave the order for their execution. This was not revenge. This was a cleanup. This is how a surgeon cuts out gangrene to save the rest of the body. That day, Rome understood. The carnival is over. Not a politician, but a crisis manager in iron armor had come to power. But securing the rear was just a prelude. Trajan needed not just obedience, he needed a tool. That very steel fist capable of smashing the gates of Dacia and scooping out all the gold down to the last speck of dust. And what was the Roman army like by the year 98? It was a herd fattened on garrison duty. The legionaries had forgotten what a 30-mile forced march in full gear was like. Discipline was staggering like a drunk in the Subura. Trajan got down to business with the fanaticism of an engineer rebuilding an engine. Forget the romantic paintings where the emperor sits on a throne and troops march by. Trajan himself went down into the mud. He didn't watch drills from a podium. He marched in formation. Imagine a soldier's shock when next to him, swallowing the same dust and chewing the same hardtack, marches the master of the world. He knew the names of the centurions. He checked the quality of bread in the cauldrons. He personally inspected the camp fortifications, and woe to him who drove a stake not deep enough. This was not drilling for the sake of drilling. This was a rewiring of consciousness. Trajan beat laziness and fear out of them, replacing them with the automatism of killers. If you want peace, prepare for war, philosophers say. Trajan didn't want peace. He was preparing a war of industrial proportions. And here begins the most boring part for poets, but the most terrifying for Rome's enemies: logistics. The Great Dacian campaign was won not by swords, but by carts. Have you ever wondered how much food 150,000 men and tens of thousands of horses need per day? These are mountains of grain, rivers of wine and vinegar, herds of cattle that need to be driven after the army, turning them into meat at halts. War is, above all, mathematics, and Trajan was a genius mathematician of death. The whole empire began to work on this campaign. In Moesia, on the right bank of the Danube, work began that made the earth tremble. The Romans didn't just pave roads, they carved them into cliffs. Look at these traces today. Stone hewn to the smoothness of glass so that wagon wheels wouldn't slip. They built warehouses that looked like cities. They dug canals to bypass the Danube rapids. This was not preparation for a battle. It was the construction of a conveyor belt. A conveyor belt designed to uninterruptedly deliver men, weapons, and provisions to the front, and ship slaves and ore back. Trajan understood one simple thing that many commanders forget. A hungry soldier doesn't fight, he loots. The Roman army had to become an autonomous machine of destruction, independent of the whims of local nature. While Decebalus strengthened fortresses in his mountains and hoped for the impregnability of the Carpathians, Trajan created infrastructure that made these mountains meaningless. He turned the wilderness into a Roman parade ground. It was a triumph of bureaucratic cynicism. Every arrow, every nail for sandals, every sack of flour was accounted for and recorded. Pliny the Younger, that enthusiastic chronicler, choked with admiration for the emperor's organizational genius. But if you read between the lines, it gets creepy. This is a description of preparation for slaughter. The Roman Empire, this giant organism, focused all its monstrous energy on one point. On the bank of the Danube, a force was gathering the likes of which the world had not seen since the Battle of Actium. The year 101 AD. The machine is assembled, greased, fueled. Trajan arrives at the border. Around him are legions, transformed from a rabble into a single organism, breathing a thirst for profit and blood. They believe him because he is one of them. They are ready to follow him into hell because he promised them that hell would be for the enemies, and for them, gold. On the other bank, beyond the wide, muddy ribbon of the river, the forests of Dacia are silent. There, in the green twilight, wolves are waiting. But they don't yet know that it isn't a man who has gone out to hunt. A system has gone out to hunt. Ruthless, faceless, inevitable as a rockfall. And when the first Roman boot touched the ground of the left bank, the clock of history began a countdown for an entire civilization. The time for diplomacy was up. The time for mechanics had begun. The emperor raised his hand. The legions moved forward. Not with shouts, but in an ominous silence, broken only by the rhythmic rumble of souls and the clanking of gear. This sound was scarier than any battle cry. It was the sound of a working press. Trajan did not hurry. He did not seek quick glory. He waged war methodically, step by step, driving wedges of fortresses into the body of the enemy country. But the very first serious encounter with the enemy showed that a mistake had been made in the calculations of Roman strategists. They accounted for grain, roads, and bridges, but they did not account for one thing: the fury of people defending their home, and a terrible weapon capable of opening Roman armor like paper. Near a place called Tape, where the mountains squeeze the valley into a narrow throat, Rome's overconfidence was about to shatter against Dacian steel. The year 101, spring. The Roman steamroller, clanking iron, rolls over the Danube. Imagine this sight. Two pontoon bridges, like arteries, pulsing with men and horses. The legions step onto the enemy shore not as guests, but as masters. They walk confidently, covered by the rectangular scutum shields, clad in lorica segmentata, the best plate armor of antiquity. They are the pinnacle of military evolution. They are sure this will be a walk in the park, another triumph over savages in skins. They don't yet know they are entering a meat grinder that will forever change the empire's military doctrine. Trajan leads them to Tapai. This is a narrow throat, the gateway to Transylvania, the only way to the Dacian capital. Decebalus is waiting for them there. He is not an idiot to fight Romans in an open field. He chooses a place where Roman discipline shatters against the chaos of a mountain forest. And when the heavens open up with a thunderstorm, and historians say that on that day thunder rumbled as if the gods themselves were placing bets, hell begins. Forget everything you've seen in Hollywood movies where barbarians mindlessly throw themselves at a steady line of legionaries and die. The Dacians were not a crowd. These were professional killers, armed with a technological nightmare Rome was not ready for. The name of this nightmare is the falx. Look at this weapon. A two-handed sword with a blade curved forward like the claw of a bird of prey or an overgrown peasant sickle. Human height in length. To wield it requires inhuman strength and disdain for protection. A Dacian warrior has no shield. He holds the falx with both hands. But he doesn't need a shield. He needs one blow. The Battle of Tapaia turned into a slaughter. When the two armies clashed, the Romans habitually locked shields, expecting direct blows. But falxes don't hit straight. The point of the hook reaches over the edge of the Roman shield, and with monstrous force, multiplied by the leverage of the long handle, comes down on the legionary's helmet. And the impossible happens. The vaunted Roman steel, which withstood blows from Celtic swords and Germanic axes, cracks like a rotten pumpkin. Imagine you are standing in the first line. You are a veteran. You went through Syria and Germany. You are confident in your armor. And suddenly, through the roar of the storm and screams, you see the point of a hook puncture your comrade's helmet on the right, entering the skull down to the lower jaw. You see the next blow split a scutum in half, along with the arm holding it. The Roman tortoise tactic and tight formation suddenly becomes a death trap. The tightness prevents maneuvering, and the Dacians, working falxes like scythes at a harvest, simply mow down the ranks. Trajan watches this from a hill. His face turns to stone. This is not a victory march. This is a catastrophe. The legions, this invincible machine, are stalling in blood. The formation is breaking. The wounded are carried to the rear not by the dozens, by the hundreds. Field surgeons, used to stitching stab wounds, are horrified. They have never seen anything like this. Severed limbs, split clavicles, opened chests. Medical tents turn into a slaughterhouse. At this moment, a scene occurs that will go down in history and be carved on the column, but which we must see without pathos. The supplies of bandages run out. There is not enough fabric to bind all those bleeding out. And Trajan, the Emperor of Rome, a living deity, begins to tear the clothes off himself. He cuts his cloak, his linen tunics, into strips to stop the blood of his soldiers. Propaganda will say, "Great mercy of the Father to the soldiers." A cynic will say, "Total failure of logistics and panic of command." When the commander-in-chief turns his wardrobe into bandages, it means things are going very, very badly. The Romans won the Battle of Tapae, but it was the victory of a boxer who knocked out his opponent but broke both his hands and jaw in the process. Decebalus retreated. He saved his army, dissolving into the mist of the forests, leaving the Romans on a battlefield strewn with corpses and moaning cripples. The Blitzkrieg failed. A quick war didn't happen. The Roman steel fist hit a wall and shattered its knuckles. Trajan stands among the smoking remains of the battle. The rain washes the blood off the grass, but it doesn't wash away the fear. He understands. To go further, to the Dacian capital Sarmizegetusa, right now is suicide. Autumn is coming. Soon snow will close the passes. The legions are bled dry. Morale is undermined by the sight of split helmets. Optimus Princeps is forced to give an order that tastes bitter as bile on the tongue. Stop. We are stopping. The Romans begin to dig in, licking their wounds. Blacksmiths urgently figure out how to save soldiers from falxes. It was then, right in the field workshops, that they started welding additional iron bars crosswise onto helmets. This panic tuning is the best proof of the terror the Dacians inspired. But while the Romans built camps and reinforced helmets, hoping to winter in relative safety, a new plan was being forged in the mountains. Trajan thought he controlled the situation. He thought the war was paused until spring. He was wrong. Decebalus wasn't going to wait while the Romans rested. He looked at the map differently. While the legions were stuck in the mountains, the lower Danube remained almost without protection. And there, in the icy silence of the approaching winter, the Dacian king prepared a counterstrike that was supposed to flip the chessboard. The Romans expected an attack from the front, but death was already saddling horses far to the east, where their ferocious allies joined the Dacians, the Sarmatians, horsemen of the apocalypse, clad in scale armor. The winter of 101 to 102 promised to be long and bloody. The Romans thought the scariest thing was the falxes at Tapae. Soon they would learn what real horror is, when underfoot isn't solid ground, but the treacherous ice of the Danube, ready to open up and swallow thousands of lives in a single second. Trajan did not yet know that this war would turn into a race for survival, where nature itself would become the enemy. The winter of the year 101 crashed down on the Carpathians not as a season, but as a punishment from the gods. The Romans, used to the mild Mediterranean climate, found themselves in an icy hell. Legionaries in their camps wrapped themselves in everything they could find, but the cold penetrated under the lorica, turning the metal of the armor into burning ice. Sentries froze to death at their posts, turning into statues covered in frost. In this white haze, it seemed that the war had frozen, that nature itself had pressed pause, giving people a respite. What naivety. While Trajan warmed his hands by a brazier in his headquarters, trying to sketch a plan for the spring offensive, Decebalus made a move that was supposed to checkmate the entire Roman expedition. The king of the Dacians knew. He couldn't knock the Romans out of the mountains with a direct attack, but he could slit their throat from the rear. While the main forces of the empire were freezing in Dacia, the province of Moesia, the supply base, the rear, the soft underbelly of the front, remained almost unprotected, and Decebalus let his most terrible allies off the chain. Look to the east. There, in the steppes where the wind roams freer than the thoughts of a philosopher, a horde gathered. These were not Dacians. These were the Roxolani, a Sarmatian tribe, the living embodiment of heavy cavalry 1,000 years before the appearance of knights. Imagine a rider clad in scale armor from head to toe. His face is covered by a mask. His horse is also dressed in armor. It is a tank of the ancient world. When such an avalanche goes on the attack, the earth trembles for a mile radius. And this avalanche needed only one thing: to cross the Danube. Winter fettered the great river with ice. For the Sarmatians, it was a road paved by nature itself, a wide white highway leading straight to the rich Roman warehouses. 10, maybe 12,000 riders, plus Dacian infantry, plus wagons, this giant mass of people and animals stepped onto the ice. They walked confidently. The ice seemed solid as rock. The silence was ringing, broken only by the crunch of snow and the snorting of horses. But physics has its own laws, and it doesn't give a damn about the ambitions of kings. When thousands of tons of live weight and iron reached the middle of the river, the Danube couldn't hold. It started not with a roar, but with a sinister crack, like the shot of a giant bow. The surface of the river, which seemed monolithic, suddenly went into a web of cracks. Imagine the horror of a rider tied to a saddle, clad in tens of kilograms of iron, when a black abyss opens up under his horse's hooves. The ice burst. It was a catastrophe of biblical scale, but without divine intervention, pure mechanics of overload. Thousands of people and horses went underwater in an instant. Those who didn't fall through immediately found themselves on floating ice floes that collided, grinding bodies into a bloody mush. The heavy armor, the pride of the Sarmatian nobility, became their anchor. They went to the bottom like stones, having not a single chance to swim out. The water of the icy Danube instantly turned brown. The screams of the drowning, the neighing of crazed horses, the crack of breaking ice. This symphony of death spread over the river for miles. Survivors floundered in the icy slush, trying to grab onto the slippery edges of the hole. But the next rows fell on them, driven by the panic of those behind. Nature, which they tried to use as a bridge, swallowed the invasion army without chewing. But even having lost part of the army in the ice trap, Decebalus and the Sarmatians still broke through to the right bank. Those who survived climbed onto Roman land, wet, frostbitten, but angry as devils. And they began to burn. Moesia went up in flames. The garrisons left by Trajan to guard the warehouses were swept away. Smoke from the fires rose to the low winter sky, signaling to Trajan, "Your rear is burning. Your army is in a trap." News of the breakthrough reached the emperor lightning fast. Imagine his state. He is locked in the mountains of Dacia, and behind his back, the enemy is destroying his bases. If he stays put, his army will die of hunger in the spring. If he retreats, it will be a shameful flight. The end of the campaign, the end of his career, possibly the end of his life. Trajan acts instantly. He leaves part of the legions to block the Dacians in the mountains, and he himself, with elite units, praetorians and cavalry, rushes back to the Danube. It was a race with death. The Romans marched forced marches knee-deep in snow, fighting through blizzards. Trajan drove his people without pity because he understood time works against Rome. He loaded troops onto ships where the river was free of ice and went downstream to intercept the enemy. Here, in the lower Danube, the war finally lost its human face. These were no longer army maneuvers. It was a brawl in a back alley where everything is used: teeth, nails, rocks. The Romans, disembarking from ships, entered battle on the move, often waist-deep in icy water. The Sarmatians, having lost maneuverability in the deep snow, turned from elusive riders into clumsy targets. Trajan was everywhere. He didn't sit in a tent. He rode along the front line, shouting orders with a voice hoarse from the frost. He understood that the fate of the empire was being decided right now, not in the Senate, but here, in this dirty, bloody snow slush. The Romans managed to push the enemy back from key cities, but the price was monstrous. All of Moesia turned into a cemetery. Frozen corpses of Romans and Sarmatians lay mixed together, dusted with fresh snow, creating a surreal landscape of a frozen battle. This winter nightmare showed Trajan that Decebalus was not just a barbarian chief, he was a strategist, capable of global operations, and that defeating him with little blood wouldn't work. Illusions dissipated finally. The war ceased to be a colonial expedition for gold. It became a personal duel between two wolves locked at each other's throats. And the climax of this duel was approaching. Two armies, exhausted by winter, cold, and endless skirmishes, converged on one point. The place was called Adamclisi, a plateau blown by all winds. The perfect stage for the finale of the first act of this tragedy. There was no room here for tactical tricks. A head-on meeting of two worlds had to happen here. Trajan gathered everything he had, exposing other sectors of the front. He bet everything. Either he would crush the coalition of Dacians and Sarmatians here and now, or the Roman eagles would be trampled into the mud, and the empire would shudder from a blow it would never recover from. The air over Adamclisi rang with tension. Soldiers sharpened swords, understanding that few would survive tomorrow. And the emperor looked at the horizon, where clouds of the enemy army were gathering, and understood. Tomorrow, he would need more bandages than at Tapai. Tomorrow, here, on this cursed plateau, it would be decided who would write history, and who would become its fertilizer. And when dawn painted the snow a pink color resembling diluted blood, trumpets sang the signal to attack. It was not a call to glory. It was a signal for the start of the most brutal meat grinder of this war. The Battle of Adamclisi was not a battle. It was a mosh pit. When 102,000 legionaries and barbarians collided on this wind-blown plateau, tactics died in the first minutes. There were no maneuvers, no beautiful flank movements. There was only dirty, viscous, squelching death. The Romans, brutalized by the winter march and humiliation on the Danube, fought not for the emperor, but for the right not to die in this cursed wilderness. They threw away their pila and hacked with gladii in such tight quarters that the dead had nowhere to fall. They stood vertically, pressed by the bodies of the living, continuing to march into oblivion together with their formation. The legionaries fought with animal fury. They realized either they would slaughter this horde, or their bones would remain whitening in the steppes of Dobruja forever. And they won. But when the smoke cleared and the adrenaline subsided, Trajan saw the price of this triumph. 3,800 Roman citizens lay dead. This isn't just a number in a report. This is almost an entire legion ground into powder in one day. 3,800 husbands, fathers, sons. The elite of the army. Trajan, this Optimus Princeps, stood among mountains of corpses and understood. One more such victory, and he would have nothing to return to Rome with. It was here, at the site of this slaughter, that he ordered not just a monument to be erected, but a giant altar, Tropaeum Traiani at Adamclisi. Today, tourists look at its reconstruction and see a majestic structure. But archaeologists who excavated the foundation found the truth there. On the walls of the altar, the names of the dead were carved. Long, endless lists. This monument is not about the glory of Roman arms. It is a giant stone tombstone, a receipt for receiving a bloody debt. It is a warning to all who follow. This is how much a piece of Dacian land costs. The spring of the year 102 brought not relief, but heavy, stifling silence. Both sides were bled dry. Decebalus, having lost his best troops and his Sarmatian allies, realized his gambit had failed. The Roman steamroller, albeit dented, continued to crawl forward. Fortress after fortress in the mountains surrendered, and the king of the Dacians did what he did best. He started playing for time. He asked for peace. The scene of their meeting with Trajan is worthy of the pen of the best playwright. The proud barbarian, king of kings, falls prostrate before the Roman emperor. He kisses the ground. He swears eternal loyalty. He promises to surrender weapons, hand over defectors, Roman engineers who taught Dacians to build death machines, raise the walls of his fortresses, and renounce any foreign policy without Rome's permission. This is total capitulation, humiliation. Trajan looks at the enemy sprawled before him and nods. He accepts the terms. He saves Decebalus's life and throne. Why? Did the best emperor suddenly become sentimental? Number Trajan does not believe a single word of Decebalus. He sees in the king's eyes not submission, but the cold hatred of a cornered wolf. Trajan knows. As soon as the legions leave, Decebalus will start preparing for revenge. But Trajan signs this peace because he has no choice. His army is exhausted. Logistics are at the limit. The treasury, although replenished with small trophies, still demands the main prize, the gold of Sarmizegetusa, which he never reached. He needs a pause. He needs to return to Rome, celebrate a triumph, the people demand spectacles, regroup forces, and prepare the final blow. This peace of the year 102 is not the end of the war. It is a break to reload weapons. And Decebalus understands this perfectly. As soon as the Roman eagles disappear over the horizon, the submissive vassal begins to act. Raise the walls? He strengthens them with doubled force, using Roman technologies. Surrender weapons? He hides the best swords in caves and starts forging new ones. Hand over defectors? He returns only a handful of useless people, keeping the best engineers for himself. Dacia turns into a compressed spring. Decebalus knows that the second round is inevitable, and this time no prisoners will be taken. Rome got its triumph. Trajan rode through the streets of the capital in a chariot. The people rejoiced. The Senate praised the victor, granting him the title Dacicus. But in the silence of his office, looking at maps, the emperor did not smile. He knew he had left a wounded beast in the rear. He understood that the peace treaty was just a piece of paper with which Decebalus would light the fire of a new war. And Trajan decided to change the rules of the game. No more risky crossings over ice. No dependence on the whims of the weather. Dacia must be chained to Rome with chains that cannot be broken. Trajan was not just going to return. He was going to build a highway to hell for the Dacian people. And for this, he needed not a general, but an architect. The emperor summons Apollodorus of Damascus, a genius, the engineering god of that era. A man who thought not in categories of stones and beams, but in categories of eternity. Trajan sets before him a task that would make anyone else lose their mind. He needs to do the impossible. He needs to conquer the Danube itself. Not swim across it, not wait for ice, but put a stone collar on the great river. Build me a bridge, says Trajan. Such a bridge that the Dacians, seeing it, will understand that resistance is futile. That they understand Rome can come to them at any moment, day or night, winter or summer. It was a challenge to nature and common sense. The Danube in that place is a churning torrent a kilometer wide, with a furious current and a bottom that cannot be reached. But Apollodorus did not argue. He took parchment and began to draw a line that would become a sentence for an entire civilization. While in Rome they were finishing wine from holiday tables, new legions were already moving to the riverbanks. This time they were legions of builders. They carried with them not swords, but timber, stone, and cement. The year 103 was beginning, and Rome was preparing to strike a blow against which one cannot defend with a shield. A strike by technology. The year 105 AD. The bank of the Danube near the fortress of Drobeta. What is happening here defies the comprehension of the barbarian mind. For the Dacians, the river was a deity, an insurmountable border, a living being that could kill or pardon. But Romans don't pray to rivers. They shackle them in chains. Apollodorus of Damascus, this demon of geometry and stone, performed a miracle that became a death sentence for an entire people. He built a bridge where it was impossible. Look at this scale. 1,135 meters long, 20 giant stone piers going into the churning water to a depth that makes ears pop. On top, airy wooden arches, a masterpiece of engineering thought, allowing the structure to breathe but withstand the weight of a marching legion. This is not just a crossing. This is architectural violence against nature. This is a statement. For Rome, there are no obstacles. Neither mountains, nor rivers, nor gods can stop the march of the empire if it needs your gold. The Dacians watched this construction from the mountains with superstitious horror. They saw Roman cranes lifting stone blocks weighing tons, hundreds of people working as a single mechanism, draining sections of the bottom with caissons. Day after day, month after month, the stone dagger went deeper into the river's body, until it connected the banks. When the last span fell into place, the Danube ceased to be a border. It became a Roman road. And so, in the spring of the year 105, the gates opened. The legions stepped onto the bridge. The rumble of thousands of hobnailed boots on the wooden deck spread over the water like peals of thunder, heralding a storm. Trajan rode in front. This time, there were no diplomats, no negotiators. The emperor's face was calm and terrible. He was crossing the Rubicon of his reign. No more truces, no client kingdoms. Apollodorus's bridge carried one single message: Dacia must disappear. The Senate in Rome had already prepared the legal basis for the slaughter. Decebalus was officially declared hostis, an enemy of the Roman people. This isn't just the title of an adversary. In Roman law, this meant the person is stripped of all rights. He can be killed like a rabid dog, and it will not be a crime, but a boon. Any treaty with him was annulled. Any mercy toward him was equated to treason. It was a license for total destruction. The Second Dacian War began not with a battle, but with methodical strangulation. Trajan, having crossed the bridge, didn't rush into attack headlong. He acted like an experienced vivisectionist. Having a crossing behind him as reliable as a rock, he could supply the army uninterruptedly. Grain, weapons, reinforcements flowed into Dacia in an endless river. The Romans began building roads straight to the heart of the mountains, cutting clearings in ancient forests. They moved slowly but inevitably, tightening the ring around Sarmizegetusa. Decebalus tried to snap back. He realized he was cornered. He violated the truce by attacking Roman garrisons. He even tried to organize an assassination attempt on Trajan by sending deserters into the Roman camp. But these were gestures of despair, an attempt to stop an avalanche with a punch. The Roman war machine, improved, lubricated with the blood of past mistakes, and equipped with the best technologies of antiquity, had already gained momentum that couldn't be stopped. Now it was a completely different war. In the year 101, the Romans went to conquer. In 105, they went to cleanse. The order was simple: scorched earth. Dacian villages burned one after another. Smoke from the fires obscured the sun over the Carpathians. Legionaries took no prisoners unless they had value for the slave market. Livestock was driven away, crops trampled. This was genocide calculated in headquarters tents with the cold efficiency of an accounting report. The atmosphere changed. If earlier in the camps jokes about barbarians could still be heard, now the gloomy concentration of executioners reigned. The soldiers knew there would be no mercy for them either. The Dacians fought with the fury of the doomed, defending their families, their homes, their shrines. But against them stood not just an enemy. Against them stood a civilization that decided their existence was economically unfeasible. The engineering miracle of Apollodorus was the beginning of the end. The bridge made Dacia part of Rome even before the last defender was killed. It turned a wild, free country into another sector on the map accessible to Roman tax collectors. The psychological spine of the Dacian resistance cracked exactly when the first cohort crossed the Danube without getting their feet wet. They understood. There is no hiding from Rome. Trajan divided the army into several columns. They came from the south, east, and west, contracting like fingers on a throat. In the Orostia Mountains, where the capital and the treasures of kings were hiding, a grand manhunt began. This was no longer a war of armies. It was a wolf hunt. The Romans methodically combed ravine after ravine, cutting off fortresses from water and food, driving the defenders higher and higher to where there were only rocks and sky. The empire showed its true face. Behind marble facades and philosophical speeches hid a predator whose teeth were made of iron and stone. Trajan came for the gold, and nothing living was supposed to stand between him and the caves of Sarmizegetusa. The stone dagger of the bridge was plunged into Dacia's body to the hilt, and now Trajan began to turn it, letting out the country's blood to feed the veins of the dying Roman economy. The hunt had begun, and the game was doomed. Look at the map of Dacia in the year 105. What you will see resembles not a military campaign diagram, but an anatomical atlas where surgical clamps cut off blood flow to a sick organ. Trajan did not repeat the mistakes of the past. He didn't throw legions into a frontal attack on mountain passes where every stone could become a grave. Instead, he divided his giant army into maneuverable columns. One group moved through the Red Tower Pass, cutting off retreat paths. Another came from the west, through the Iron Gates, sweeping away border barriers. The third, under the command of the Emperor himself, went through the center, straight to the heart of the Orostia mountain system. It was boa constrictor tactics. Slow, methodical, suffocating compression of rings. The Romans no longer sought a general battle. Why risk the life of a valuable legionary in hand-to-hand combat if you can simply starve the enemy to death? The scorched earth tactic was applied with frightening efficiency. Legions walked through blooming valleys, leaving behind only ash and silence. Granaries were burned. Villages where shepherds and artisans had lived for centuries were leveled to the ground. Wells were filled in or poisoned with animal carcasses. Trajan created a death zone around Decapolis's capital, a vacuum in which it was impossible to exist. It was cold calculation. Deprive the Dacians of a resource base, force their refugees to flood the fortresses, devouring meager provisions, sowing panic and disease. The heroism of Dacian warriors shattered against the ruthless logistics of the empire. You can be the best swordsman in the Carpathians, but you cannot fight if you haven't eaten for 3 days and your family is dying of typhus in a crowded cave. In the Oreshtie Mountains stood a system of fortresses unparalleled in the barbarian world. Blidaru, Piatra Roșie, Costești. These citadels, built of huge stone blocks using murus dacicus technology, seemed impregnable. They hung on rocks like eagle nests, controlling approaches to the sacred Sarmizegetusa. Decebalus calculated that the Romans would break their teeth storming these walls. But the Romans didn't storm. They worked. Legionaries approached another stronghold, and what began was not a battle, but construction. They erected siege ramparts higher than the fortress walls. They assembled giant ballistas that hurled stones weighing 50 kilograms, smashing roofs and crushing defenders' bones. They blocked streams feeding the garrisons with water, engineers against heroes, mathematics against fury. One by one, the fortresses fell, choking on thirst and hopelessness. Piatra Roșie was taken without a single sword blow in open combat. It was simply strangled by blockade. Archaeologists find traces of a terrible fire and Roman arrowheads there, but almost no signs of hand-to-hand combat. The defenders were either killed remotely or surrendered. And here begins the dirtiest chapter of this story: betrayal. When the ring tightened, the Dacian elite, those very pileati in felt caps who swore to die for their king, flinched. They saw the power of the Roman machine. They realized that Decebalus was a dead man walking, and they made their choice. Roman historians, savoring the details, describe how noble Dacians began to defect to Trajan's camp. Not singly, by whole clans. They brought with them not only their lives, but also secrets. They showed secret paths bypassing fortifications. They told where water reserves were hidden. They sold out their brothers of yesterday, buying themselves the right to live in a collar, but with a full bowl. Trajan received them with icy politeness. He didn't need their souls. He needed information. It was traitors who helped the Romans capture Decebalus's sister. This was a massive psychological blow. The king, having lost his family, lost face. The myth of his divine selection melted with every day. Yesterday's leader of the nation turned into a cornered beast, a lone wolf around whom a pack of hounds is closing in. Imagine the atmosphere in Decebalus's headquarters in the autumn of 105. News arrives one scarier than the other. The fortress of Costești has fallen. Romans are a day's journey away. Noble chiefs are fleeing. Allies are silent. In the eyes of the entourage, fear and a silent question. What are we dying for? And beyond the walls, in the fog of mountain forests, only the rhythmic sound of Roman axes and the creaking of siege tower wheels is heard. This sound is scarier than war trumpets. It is the sound of inevitability. The Romans drove the Dacians to the top of the world, into their last refuge. There was nowhere left to retreat. The whole country lay in ruins. The whole economy was destroyed, all hopes trampled by legionary Caligae. Only Sarmizegetusa remained, the heart of Dacia, the sacred city of temples and gold. Trajan did not hurry. He let his troops regroup, bring up the rear, repair armor. He wanted the finale to be perfect, for the blow to be delivered with all the crushing power the empire was capable of. He looked at the mountain peaks where his enemy was hiding, and perhaps felt not triumph, but the fatigue of a hunter who has finally cornered the most dangerous game in a dead end. Winter was approaching, but this time it couldn't save the Dacians. The Romans were ready. They had come to stay. Legions stood at the gates of the capital, and the air trembled with tension. Tens of thousands of people prepared for the last act of the drama. Trajan raised his hand, and siege engines began to roll into position. The wolf hunt was over. The slaughter was beginning. Ahead was Sarmizegetusa, a city destined to die so that Rome could live. Welcome to hell, at an altitude of 1,200 meters above sea level. Sarmizegetusa. This name sounds like a spell, but for Trajan's legionaries, it became synonymous with a curse.
You think a barbarian capital is a collection of dirty huts behind a palisade. You are mistaken. Before the Romans lay a metropolis of the mountains. Stone roads, paved squares, astronomical calendars that rivaled Egyptian ones in accuracy, and powerful walls encircling the sacred mountain in a spiral of death. It was the Jerusalem of the Carpathians, a spiritual center, a fortress, and a bank vault all rolled into one. Trajan wasn't going to storm these walls head-on. He saw how fanatically the Dacians fought on the approaches. Every meter of ascent would cost him hundreds of lives of select infantry, and the emperor knew how to count. Instead of sending soldiers to the slaughter, he sent engineers. The quietest and most terrible phase of the siege began. While the legions simulated preparation for an attack, distracting the defenders with noise and smoke, special units looked for a vulnerability. Not in the walls, in the ground. The Romans were looking for water. They knew. A city hanging in the clouds cannot survive without water supplied by a complex system of ceramic pipes from mountain springs. And they found them. One blow of a pickaxe, splitting a terracotta pipe, decided the fate of the war faster than thousands of swords. The water stopped flowing. Silence fell over Sarmizegetusa. A silence in which you can hear hope dripping away into the dry earth. Imagine this moment. Tens of thousands of people, warriors, women, children, the elderly, locked in a stone bag under the scorching sun or cold rain. Thirst is a terrible executioner. It kills slowly, drives you crazy, turns a human into an animal. But the Dacians didn't wait for thirst to force them to crawl on their knees before the Roman gates. They chose another path. A path that made even cynical Roman veterans, who later burst into the city, break into a cold sweat. Inside the fortress, a tragedy of antique scale played out. The priests, those guardians of the secrets of Zalmoxis, realized the gods had turned away. Or the gods demand the last, most terrible sacrifice. They began to set fire to their temples. The wooden structures of sanctuaries, soaked in resin and centuries of prayers, flared up like torches. The fire spread to residential quarters. Smoke filled the valley, acrid, black smoke, smelling not only of wood, but also of burning flesh. And in the royal palace, a final feast was taking place. On Trajan's column, there is a scene that is impossible to forget. A group of Dacian noble warriors. They are not sharpening swords. They are not putting on armor. They are passing a cup to each other. One for all. In the cup is not wine. There is poison. Most likely a tincture of yew or hemlock, a drink granting eternal sleep. Look into their stone faces. There is no fear there. There is contempt. They are drinking death voluntarily. It was an act of mass suicide by the elite.
They knew what awaited them in Roman captivity. Chains, a cage, a walk through the streets of Rome to the hooting of the crowd, and then a garrote in the dungeon of the Tullianum. They chose to leave as free men, One by one, the chiefs fell onto the mosaic floor, writhing in agony as the poison stopped their hearts. This was not flight. It was a final spit in the face of the empire. You will get our walls, but you will not get us. When the Romans finally broke down the gates and burst into the city, they expected a furious skirmish. They gripped gladii, ready to hack. But there was almost no one to hack. They entered a ghost town. The streets were strewn with corpses, not killed in battle, but poisoned or burned alive. Legionaries walked through the smoke, covering their faces with cloaks, stepping over the bodies of defenders who preferred death to slavery. Instead of a triumphant cry, heavy, oppressive silence hung over Sarmizegetusa. Soldiers rushed to loot, but the fire devoured wealth faster than their hands. Gold jewelry melted, turning into shapeless ingots among the embers. The architecture the Dacians were proud of collapsed before their eyes. Trajan ordered the remains of the walls leveled to the ground. The Romans methodically destroyed what the fire didn't destroy. The sacred circles of temples were smashed, stone blocks thrown into the abyss. The empire didn't just capture the capital, it was erasing memory. Trajan wanted nothing to remain in this place except the wind and wolf howls, so that no Dacian in the future could come here and say, "Here stood a great city." It was an execution of geography. Sarmizegetusa died in agony, choking on smoke and poison, taking the secrets of its religion and culture with it to the grave. But among this ash and piles of corpses, Trajan did not find the main thing. He didn't find Decebalus, and he didn't find the treasury. The king disappeared. Like a ghost, he dissolved into the mountains, taking with him loyal men and what Rome had started this bloody slaughter for: gold. Hundreds of tons of gold. Trajan stood on the ruins of the palace, and his face was grim. He won the battle for the capital, but the war wasn't finished. The wounded beast got away, and this beast was most dangerous now, when he had nothing to lose. Decebalus is somewhere out there, in the wild thickets, and as long as he is alive, Dacia is alive. And the gold. Gold couldn't vanish without a trace. It must be somewhere nearby. The Roman machine switched modes. From an assault column, it turned into a search party. The most massive hunt in the history of antiquity began. Cavalrymen scoured the forests, interrogating every survivor, torturing every shepherd. Where is he? Where is the gold? The ring of the chase expanded, capturing more and more valleys. The Romans followed the bloody trail the fugitive king left behind. And this trail led to a river, at the bottom of which lay a secret, capable of paying for all the deaths of this war. History was approaching its climax, and the price of this climax was measured no longer in lives, but in ingots. Sarmizegetusa lay in ruins, but Trajan did not sleep soundly. The city was dead, its defenders rotting under collapsed walls, but the main prize had slipped away. Roman treasurers, combing the cellars of the royal palace, found only shards and ash. Where is the gold? Where are those mountains of treasure for which the empire drove half its provinces into debt? The war, won on the battlefield, threatened to turn into an economic collapse if the trophies didn't cover the monstrous expenses for legions and bridges. And then not soldiers, but executioners entered the business. Romans knew how to loosen tongues just as well as they built roads. Among the prisoners was Bacillus, a trusted friend and advisor to Decebalus, a man who knew all the secrets of the court. We don't know exactly what they did to him in the Roman dungeon. History shamefully stays silent about the interrogation methods of the praetorians. But we know the result. Bacillus broke,
With a trembling finger, he pointed not to a cave and not to a secret bunker. He pointed to the river, to the turbulent, icy Sargesia flowing at the foot of the fortress. What followed this confession became one of the grandest engineering criminal operations of antiquity. Trajan ordered the river turned back. Legionaries, putting aside swords, took up shovels. In record time, a new channel was dug, and the waters of the Sargesia, obeying the will of the conquerors, went aside. The exposed bottom hid the answer to the question of whether this war was worth the candle. In pits hollowed out in the bedrock, covered with stones and sealed with silt, lay the future of Rome. When soldiers opened the caches, even seasoned centurions gasped. These were not chests. These were deposits. 165 tons of purest gold. 331 tons of silver. Cups, ingots, jewelry, coins, the accumulations of Dacian kings over centuries of raids and trade. It was a jackpot, an economic explosion. To give you an idea of the scale, this gold would have been enough to abolish all taxes in the empire for a year, give every citizen a generous handout, and there would still be enough left to build a new forum. Rome, which just yesterday stood on its knees before creditors, instantly became the richest state in history. Dacia wasn't just robbed, it was gutted. Its financial blood now flowed into Rome's veins, reviving the dead economy, launching construction projects, and paying for gladiatorial games of unseen scope. But while treasurers with a feverish gleam in their eyes loaded gold onto carts sagging under the weight of the metal, another hunt was underway in the forests.
The gold was found, but the man who hid it was still alive. Decebalus, the symbol of resistance. As long as he breathed, Trajan's victory was incomplete. The Roman order does not tolerate live enemies at liberty. A special cavalry detachment was sent for the king's head. Leading the chase galloped Tiberius Claudius Maximus, a veteran who fought his way up from the bottom, a tough professional whose career depended on the outcome of this race. The Romans followed the trail like hounds. They knew, Decebalus is trying to escape to the east, into the wild foothills, to perhaps gather an army again, or disappear into the steppes. But this time luck turned away from the Wolf King. His retinue thinned by the hour, horses fell from exhaustion, traitors reported his every step. The ring closed in a dense thicket. Roman riders flew out into a clearing, cutting off the last path to retreat. Decebalus found himself under an old spreading oak. He was alone, surrounded, cornered. He saw the shine of Roman armor, heard the snorting of horses, and understood. This is the end. There will be no captivity. Humiliation in chains, a walk along the Via Sacra under the spit of the rabble, strangulation in a damp cell. None of this will happen. He won't give Trajan such pleasure. On Trajan's column, this scene is carved with cinematic precision. Decebalus, falling on one knee under the tree, brings his curved knife, a sica, to his throat. In his gaze there is no fear, only cold determination. A Roman rider, that same Maximus, reaches out a hand, trying to stop him, trying to take the king alive. A live Decebalus would be worth more than any gold at the triumph. But the Roman is late by a split second. A sharp movement of the hand. The blade opens the throat. Blood gushes onto the oak roots, mixing with mud and fallen leaves. The last king of Dacia falls, dying a free man. He put the period in the history of his people himself, denying Rome the right to be his executioner. When Maximus jumped off his horse and ran up to the body, Decebalus was already dead or dying. In rage that the trophy slipped away, or perhaps following a strict instruction, the Roman did what he did best. He drew his sword and with one blow sliced off the king's head. The tragedy ended in a farce worthy of a butcher shop. Decebalus's head, this noble head of a warrior and strategist, was thrown into a sack. It was taken to the Roman camp, to Trajan, as proof of a job done. The emperor looked into the glassy eyes of his enemy without a shadow of sympathy. For him, it was just closure, the final act of a bureaucratic procedure to pacify a province. The head was sent to Rome. There, in the center of the civilized world, it was thrown onto the Gemonian stairs, a place of shame where the bodies of executed criminals rotted. The jubilant crowd spat in the face of the one whom just yesterday they feared to trembling. Senators made bombastic speeches about the greatness of Roman arms, looking at a decomposing piece of flesh. No one thought about honor. No one thought that together with this man, an entire universe died. Language, culture, faith. Rome got its gold and its head. The triumph was full, absolute. But if you think the horror ended there, you don't know Rome well. The death of the king and the seizure of the treasury were just a prelude to the real nightmare. Now that resistance was decapitated and the country bled dry, Trajan proceeded to implement the final part of his plan. A plan that did not imply coexistence. Dacia was not supposed to simply lose. It was supposed to become a blank page on which Rome would write its history.
And while flies circled over Decebalus's head on the Gemonian stairs, in the mountains of Transylvania, an operation for total territory cleanup began, which modern lawyers would call by the dry and terrible term, depopulation. When Decebalus's head rolled down the Gemonian stairs under the roar of the Roman crowd, silence fell in Dacia. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a morgue. The war was over, but for the Dacian people, the real end of the world began. Trajan wasn't going to leave a conquered nation in the rear that could pick up falxes again in a generation. He didn't need subjects who remembered the taste of freedom. He needed clean land, territory, a resource. And he launched a process that modern historians shamefully call Romanization, but which in fact was the methodical erasing of an ethnicity. Listen to these numbers. They are scarier than any battle description. 500,000 people. 500,000. That is how many men, women, and children, according to some historians' estimates, were driven into Roman slavery. Imagine this column, a living river of human grief flowing south, across the Danube, over those very bridges built for war. They were leaving, never to return. Mines, quarries, brothels, and gladiator schools of the empire awaited them. Dacia was depopulated. Villages stood empty, with open doors where the wind walked. Fields were overgrown with weeds. An entire civilization, with its language, religion, and culture, was uprooted and dissolved in the belly of insatiable Rome. But emptiness cannot last forever. The empire abhors a vacuum. Trajan announced a great colonization. Eutropius, a Roman historian, wrote a phrase that sounds like an epitaph to the Dacians. Ex toto orbe Romano. From the whole Roman world. Into the empty, bleeding country poured new people, legion veterans receiving land as a reward for killing, landless peasants from Italy, adventurers from Syria and Gaul, merchants, speculators, officials. It was a great migration of peoples organized by the state. Dacia turned into the Wild West of antiquity.
Land soaked in the blood of indigenous inhabitants was divided by new masters. They brought Latin with them, they brought their gods, and in just 1 or 2 generations, the Dacian language disappeared. It didn't just change, it went extinct. Today's Romanians speak the language of the conquerors, the language of Rome. Is this not the most convincing proof of the effectiveness of genocide? When the descendants of victims speak the language of executioners, the empire's victory becomes absolute. And what about Rome? While Dacia was dying, the eternal city choked in ecstasy. The gold of Sarmizegetusa reached the capital, and Trajan threw a party the likes of which the world had never seen. 123 days, 4 months of continuous celebration.
For 123 days, the arena of the Colosseum was red with blood.
But now it wasn't the blood of Roman citizens, but the blood of those driven from the north, and thousands of wild beasts. 10,000 gladiators came out onto the sand to die for the crowd's amusement. 11,000 animals, lions, tigers, bears, bison, were killed for the spectacle. Entry was free. Bread was given out for free. Wine flowed like a river. Romans praised their emperor, Optimus Princeps, the most generous of the generous. But no one in this drunken stupor thought about the price. No one saw behind the shine of gold coins the empty eye sockets of burned Dacian houses. Rome's economy received a monstrous injection of adrenaline. Debts were paid, the port at Ostia rebuilt, aqueducts repaired. The empire bought itself another 200 years of life, paying with the corpse of a neighboring people. The monument to this triumph became Trajan's Forum,
the grandest, most expensive construction project in Roman history.
Walk mentally through its ruins today. The Basilica Ulpia, Greek and Latin libraries, a market resembling a modern shopping mall. All of this stands on a foundation of Dacian gold. Every marble block here is someone's taken life. This is architecture paid for by looting on a planetary scale. And in the center of this splendor stands it, the column. 30 meters of Carrara marble, a spiral of history reaching into the sky. Tourists admire the detailing of the reliefs. Art historians write dissertations on composition. But let's look the truth in the eye. This is not a monument. It is an inventory list. It is a receipt from a store, chiseled in stone. Look at the scenes at the very top of the column. There are no heroic duels. There are burning villages depicted. There are women clutching children being dragged away by Roman legionaries depicted. There are herds of cattle being driven into captivity depicted.
The Romans were so cynical and confident in their right of the strong that they didn't shy away from immortalizing their war crimes. For them, it wasn't cruelty. For them, it was efficiency. We came, we saw, we took everything you had and ground you into dust. And we are proud of it. Trajan died 9 years after the triumph, at the peak of glory, deified while still alive. Dacia remained a Roman province for 165 years, and then Rome left. The legions left this land, leaving behind a mixed population, ruins of cities, and the Latin language. But the Dacians as a people never revived. They remained only shadows on the marble of the column, silent extras in a play about Roman greatness. We have reached the end of our investigation. Turn off the sound. Step away from Trajan's column. Look back at the modern world. We are used to admiring Rome. We call it the cradle of civilization. We learn Roman law. We copy their architecture. We dream of the strength of their legions. But now you know what hides behind this glossy facade. The greatness of Rome is not only white togas and wise laws. It is cold, calculating cruelty.
It is the ability to turn war into a business project. It is the readiness to sacrifice millions for the sake of currency exchange rate stability. Trajan really was the best emperor for the Romans. But for the Dacians, he became a demon of death, an annihilator, a horseman of the apocalypse. History is not a fairy tale about good and evil. It is a chronicle of survival. And often the one who survives is not the one who is right, but the one who is better organized, who has more iron, and who has no conscience. Trajan's column stands in the center of Rome as an eternal reminder. Civilization is an expensive luxury, and the bill for this banquet is always paid by the losers. Are you ready now to look at these white stones with the same delight? Or do you, like me, see invisible bloodstains on them that neither rains nor centuries can wash away? Who is the real hero here? The builder of an empire who destroyed a people for the prosperity of his state, or the barbarian who slit his own throat so as not to become a slave? The answer to this question depends not on history textbooks. It depends on what you consider the price of human dignity. The curtain falls, but the echo of the Dacian catastrophe still sounds if you know how to listen to the silence of dead cities.